Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Board of Directors and Management of Phil Equity Fund Inc., Phil Equity PSE Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dividend Yield Fund Inc., Phil Equity MSCI Philippine Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund Inc., and Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund Inc. I would like to welcome you to this live webcast and extend our appreciation for your presence at the 2023 Annual Stockholders Meeting. Let me welcome our fellow stockholders who have joined us in this live webcast of these proceedings remotely, in absentia, or by the appointment of the chairman as proxy. Joining us in this meeting are the Board of Directors of Phil Equity Management Inc., namely Chairman Roberto C. Lorayes, President Edmundo P. Bunyi Jr., Treasurer Joseph L. Ong, Independent Director Andy O. Co., Independent Director Bert C. Hontiveros, Independent Director Gregorio T. Yu, Director Willie B. N. Osier, Director Valentino C. CSY, Director Wilson L.C., and Independent Director nominee Antonio C. Mancopa Jr. Our attorney Jonathan P. Cruz, our Corporate Secretary, the other members of the Board of Directors and our officers, namely Treasurer Violeta O. Luyim, Independent Director Daniel A. Ochoco, Independent Director Dobby A. Tan, Independent Director Norman L. Wee, Director Leo Macguire Garcia, Director Gregorio U. Hilaico, Director Antonio R. Samson, Director Aurora L. Shi, and Director Felipe U. Yap. Finally, also present for this meeting are representative of SGV & Company, our external auditor. Since these stockholders meeting are conducted remotely for the corporation, may the Corporate Secretary enumerate the rules and procedures for the remote meeting?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. In accordance with Section 23 and 57 of the Revised Corporation Code and SEC Memorandum Circular Number 6, Series of 2020, stockholders who intended to participate in the meeting remotely were requested to notify the Corporate Secretary at asm@philequity.net on or before September 19, 2023, so that they may exercise the right to vote remotely or in absentia. Stockholders who intended to vote by proxy were requested to submit their duly executed proxies on or before September 19, 2023. Under the voting procedures outlined in http://www.philequity.net/asm2023.ph, which contained the complete information on the annual meeting, and as outlined in the definitive information statement, stockholders were requested to submit their voting tickets and proxies, questions, comments, clarifications, and suggestions via email to asm@philequity.net until September 19, 2023. All votes submitted would be validated and tabulated on September 20, 2023, and the results of the voting would be reported after each item is taken up in this meeting. Finally, a moderator shall monitor and raise any concerns in the comment section during the meeting to ensure that all stockholders' comments are properly voiced and addressed. Shareholders who wish to ask questions or voice concerns are requested to type their questions or concerns in the Q&A tab at the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, Were notices of this meeting properly sent to the stockholders of each corporation?
Mr. Chairman, notices of this meeting were sent to the stockholders of record as of August 31, 2023, as evidenced by the certificates attesting to the sending of the notices.
Mr. Secretary, please attach the proof of service to the records of this meeting. Is there a quorum, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there is a valid quorum for the transaction of any business as well as the approval of the items contained in the notice and agenda for today's meeting for all corporations, namely Phil Equity Fund Inc., Phil Equity PSE Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dividend Yield Fund Inc., Phil Equity MSCI Philippines Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund Inc., and Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund Inc. And the list of the exact number of shares in attendance for each fund are shown on the screen. We will reflect in the minutes the breakdown of the stockholders present in terms of their mode of attendance and the percentage of the outstanding shares that they own, as well as the number of those joining us in the live webcast of the meeting.
Notice having been given in accordance with the bylaws and a quorum being present, we are now ready to transact business. The first item in our agenda is the reading and approval of the minutes of the last annual stockholders meeting held on October 28, 2022. Were copies of the said minutes made available to the stockholders prior to the start of this meeting?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, electronic copies of the minutes of the last annual stockholders meeting held on October 28, 2022 were posted and made available to the stockholders at https://www.philequity.net/ASM2023.ph prior to this meeting. Based on the tabulation of the votes cast in absentia or by proxy on September 20, 2023, the required votes of stockholders from all corporations, namely Phil Equity Fund Inc., Phil Equity PSE Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dividend Yield Fund Inc., Phil Equity MSCI Philippines Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund Inc., and Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund Inc. were cast in favor of the approval of the minutes of the annual meeting held on October 28, 2022. The list of the exact number of votes for each fund are shown on the screen. Therefore, the minutes of the annual meeting held on October 28, 2022 is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let us now proceed to the next item in our agenda, which is the report of the corporation's operation and result for the year 2022. Copies of information statement with the accompanying annual report of the corporation, together with the quarterly stockholders several weeks prior to this meeting. The annual report contains summaries on operation and the audited financial statement of the corporation for the calendar year ended December 31st, 2022. May I call on Head of Sales and Marketing, Ms. Darlene A.C., to present the report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and fellow investors of the funds. I will present the operations and results of the family of funds for the year 2022. For assets under management, this is how it stood at the end of the last 3 years. For the year ended 2022, Phil Equity Fund held 9.8 billion pesos. Phil Equity PSE Index Fund held 3.8 billion pesos. The Dividend Yield Fund stood at 2.1 billion pesos. The Phil Equity MSCI Philippines Index Fund stood at 313 million pesos. The Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund stood at 305 million pesos, and the Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund stood at 235 million pesos. The latest figure we have is as of yesterday, September 28th. It is mostly lower, primarily due to the lower the lower asset prices of the underlying holdings of the respective funds, as well as some significant redemptions we've experienced in the Philequity Fund.
Mr. Secretary?
Sorry. For In terms of performance, these are how the equity funds return compared to their benchmarks. All equity funds were down for 2022, but despite being in negative territory, the Philequity Fund, PSE Index Fund, and the MSCI Philippine Index Fund outperformed their respective benchmarks. On the other hand, the Philequity Dividend Yield Fund underperformed the PSEI, but it had a significant outperformance of 14% over the PSEI for the prior year in 2021. As of yesterday, all the funds are down for the year, but they are all outperforming their respective benchmarks, in which, in this case, the PSEI is down 3.5%, while the MXPH is down 3.1%. For the bond funds, both the Philequity Peso Bond Fund and the Philequity Dollar Income Fund were down for the year 2022. This is due to the sharp rise in interest rates driven by the aggressive hikes by central banks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next matter in the agenda of is the ratification of all acts of the Board of
Longer
Directors.
dated bonds, and having a significant portion of assets in money market placements for the Dollar Income Fund.
Okay.
Is that all?
We usually present the awards received for the past year, but since the awarding ceremonies will not occur until later in November, we instead are showing the total awards we received from the Philippine Investment Funds Association, or the Association for All Mutual Funds in the country. PIFA started giving out its performance-based awards in the 1, 3, 5, and 10-year categories. And in total, the 5 mutual funds have received 133 awards, the bulk of which was received by our flagship Philequity Fund. These were the latest awards received last year for the performance in 2021, most notable of which was the Philequity Fund, which continues to receive year after year the first place award for the 10-year equity category. Another highlight award went to the Philequity PSE Index Fund, which won the first place for the best index fund in the 10-year category. This is a graph of the Philequity Fund since inception. There we go. Sorry. This is a graph of the Philequity Fund since its inception in 1994. And for the past 29 years, the fund has generated a compounded annual growth rate of 12.3% versus the PSEI, which had a compounded annual growth rate of 2.6%. As always, we would like to thank our customers for their continued support. And that's all I have to report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Apologies earlier. I have been having some internet problems. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, based on the tabulation of the votes cast in absentia or by proxy on September 20, 2023, the required votes of shareholders from all corporations, namely Philequity Fund Inc., Philequity PSE Index Fund Inc., Philequity Dividend Yield Fund Inc., Philequity MSCI Philippines Index Fund Inc., Philequity Dollar Income Fund Inc., and Philequity Peso Bond Fund Inc. were cast in favor of the approval of the annual reports and audited financial statements of the corporations for 2022. The list of the exact number of votes for each fund are shown on the screen. Therefore, the annual reports and audited financial statements for 2022 of the corporations are approved.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next matter in the is the ratification of all acts of the Board of Directors and officers from the date of the last stockholders meeting up to the present. The acts of the board and officers for ratification are those done in the regular course of business. We highlight the notable ones, including the change of transfer agent service from BDO Bank to Phil Equity Management and the issuance of 100 billion units of the participation for the Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund, Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund, and the PSE Index Fund, which were approved by the board of these funds during their respective meetings on April 24, 2023, which are those which are among the matters for which your ratification is being sought. Our current transfer agent has been increasing the fees, hence the board of these funds have deemed it to be the best interest of these funds and its stockholders to move to another transfer agent. On the other hand, a mutual fund can offer both shares and units of participation. So instead of applying for the increase in capital stock, the board of these funds approved the issuance of units of participation instead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, based on the tabulation of the votes cast in absentia or by proxy on September 20, 2023, the required votes of shareholders from all corporations, namely Phil Equity Fund Inc., Phil Equity PSE Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dividend Yield Fund Inc., Phil Equity MSCI Philippines Index Fund Inc., Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund Inc., and Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund Inc. were cast in favor of the ratification of all acts of the Board of Directors and Officers from the date of the last meeting up till today. The list of the exact number of votes for each fund are shown on the screen. Therefore, all the acts of the Board of Directors and Officers of the corporation from the date of the last stockholders meeting up to the present are approved and ratified.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next item in the agenda is the election of directors of the corporations for the ensuing year and until the next election. There will be 7 seats to fill for the Phil Equity Dividend Yield Fund, Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund, Phil Equity Fund, Phil Equity MSCI Philippine Index Fund, Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund, and Phil Equity PSE Index Fund. 2 out of the 7 seats are to be filled by independent directors. The nomination committee has pre-screened and evaluated all nominations for directors pursuant to the corporation bylaws. All nominations were made on and before August 18, 2023, and the nominations committee has prepared the final list of nominees for election as board of directors. No further nominations shall be allowed or entertained on the floor during the stockholders meeting, as stated in the information statement furnished to all stock shareholders. The following have been nominated for election as member of the board of directors. For Phil Equity Fund Inc., Ignacio B. Jimenez, Violeta O. Lu Yim, Antonio R. Samson, Aurora L. Shi, and Felipe Yu Yap. The nomination committee has also named Daniel A. Ochoco and Norman L. Wee as nominees for the position of independent director. There are no other nominees for the members of the board of directors. For the Phil Equity PSE Index Fund Inc., Ignacio B. Jimenez, Leo Maguire Garcia, Gregorio U. Hilaico, Violeta O. Lu Yim, and Felipe Yu Yap. The Nominations Committee has also named Daniel A. Ochoco and Dobin A. Tan as nominee for the position of Independent Director. There are no other nominees for the member of the Board of Directors. For the Phil Equity Dividend Fund, Inc., Ignacio B. Jimenez, Leo Macquar Garcia, Violeta O. Lu Yim, Antonio R. Samson, and Aurora L. Shi. The Nomination Committee has also named Daniel A. Onchoco and Dobin A. Tan as nominee for the position of Independent Director. There are no other nominees for the no member of the Board of Directors. For the Phil Equity MSCI Philippine Index Fund, Inc., Ignacio B. Jimenez, Leo Macguire Garcia, Gregorio U. Hilaico, Violeta O. Lu Yim, and Aurora L. Shi. The Nomination Committee has also named Dobin A. Tan and Norman L. Wee as nominees for the position of Independent Director. There are no other nominees for the member of the Board of Directors. For the Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund, Inc., and the Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund, Inc., Ignacio B. Jimenez, Violeta O. Lu Yim, Antonio R. Samson, Aurora L. Shi, and Felipe Yu Yap. The Nomination Committee has also named Daniel A. Onchoco and Dobin A. Tan as nominees for the position of Independent Director. There are no other nominees for the member of the Board of Directors. All of the aforementioned names are up for re-election. Mr. Secretary, what were the results of the election?
Mr. Chairman, based on the tabulation of the votes cast in absentia or by proxy on September 20, 2023, the required votes of shareholders from all corporations, namely Phil Equity Fund, Inc., Phil Equity PSE Index Fund, Inc., Phil Equity Dividend Yield Fund, Inc., Phil Equity MSCI Philippines Index Fund, Inc., Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund, Inc., and Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund, Inc., were cast in favor of each nominee for election to the Board of Directors. The list of the exact number of votes for each fund are shown on the screen. Therefore, the election of all nominees to the boards of each Board of Directors of each corporation is considered approved.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let us now consider the next item in the agenda, which is the appointment of the external auditor. The Audit Committee has pre-screened and recommended, and the Board of Directors have endorsed for consideration and approval of the stockholders the reappointment of the current as external auditor, Sisip Gores Velayo and Company, for the year 2023. Sisip Gores Velayo and Company is one of the leading auditing firms in the country and is duly accredited by the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Mr. Chairman, based on the tabulation of the votes cast in absentia or by proxy September 20, 2023, the required votes of shareholders from all corporations, namely Phil Equity Fund, Inc., Phil Equity PSE Index Fund, Inc., Phil Equity Dividend Yield Fund, Inc., Phil Equity MSCI Philippines Index Fund, Inc., Phil Equity Dollar Income Fund, Inc., and Phil Equity Peso Bond Fund, Inc., were cast to reappoint Sisip Gores Velayo and Company as the corporation's external auditor for the year 2023. The list of the exact number of votes cast for each corporation are shown on the screen. The reappointment of Sisip Gores Velayo and Company as the external auditor for 2023 of each corporation is therefore approved.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there other matters or considerations that require consideration of the stockholders?
None, Mr. Chairman.
We will now entertain questions that any stockholder may have or may have received from the stockholders, if any.
Mr. Chairman, there are no questions posted on our Q&A tab.
All right. There having no other matter for discussion, the meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you for attending the 2023 Annual Stockholders Meeting of the PhilEquity Management Fund.